Fanfic Corner, presented by Jennifer. Hogwarts Rebels, Chapter 1, Lost, written by Star Wars Dragons, read by Jennifer. The Bridger twins stood staring at what they used to call home. Flames still burned brightly under the glow of the moon. Sabine was crying into Ezra's shoulder as he clutched her protectively. It had been an eventful night. It had started when their parents came running into the twins' room. They had been reading about Quidditch when their parents burst in. They said they were in danger from Death Eaters. The twins had heard about them. They were Lord Voldemort's supporters. They were terrified as one came into the room a few seconds afterwards. He pointed his wand at Mr. and Mrs. Bridger, who were standing in front of their children, pleading that he would kill them and spare the twins. Ezra could still hear their dying screams as the Death Eater murdered them. He then lit the house on fire and left Sabine and Ezra for dead. Thankfully, Sabine had always been gifted with skills on a broomstick. She grabbed their father's trusty firebolt, and the twins flew out of the window. Now, there they were, staring at as their house fell apart, feeling empty, devastated, lost. It wasn't long before a group of adult wizards came and put out the flames. Ezra recognized a few of which were his parents' friends. One of them, Remus Lupin, came hurrying over and put his arms around the twins, trying to comfort them, saying that everything would be all right. But there was nothing that could help the twins. They had lost their home. They had lost their family. They'd lost everything. 3 years later. Sabine looked over her drawing book at Ezra as he closed the door behind him. "Do I even want to know?" she asked timidly at the angry look on her brother's face. "Miss Atema wants me to clean out the attic tomorrow," Ezra replied, flopping down on his bed. "Ezra, did you set her hair on fire just by clicking your fingers?" Sabine pointed out. "I didn't mean to do it on purpose," Ezra explained. "She was being a downright cow." "What did she say this time?" Sabine sighed, putting her book down. "She insulted our parents. Said we were just as bad as them. Selfish, arrogant, said we were nothing but problems." Ezra sighed miserably and curled his hands, which were balled up into tight fists. "I miss Mom and Dad," he whispered. "They never would have treated us like this." Sabine stood up, walked over to Ezra, and sat beside him. "I miss them too, but we can't bring them back. This is our home now until we get adopted or we go to Hogwarts." "I know. That's what bothers me." Ezra sighed and sat up. Sabine put her arms around Ezra, who put his hand on hers. It had been 3 years since their parents murdered by a Death Eater. Lupin decided it was best if Sabine and Ezra were taken to an orphanage until they were old enough to go to Hogwarts, a school for witches and wizards. Ezra and Sabine had strong magic blood and had their names down on the list ever since they were born. The Bridger siblings tried to get them to change their minds, get them to take them in, but the decision had already been made. And Lupin absolutely refused to look after them. As soon as they asked, he declined immediately. The reason why was beyond them. Now here they were, in Miss Althem's orphanage. They were both now 7 years old, and were the only children there. There used to be 4 other orphans, but they got adopted a few months ago. Now Ezra and Sabine were the last children. Another reason why Lupin said to put them there was because it was another way to hide them from Death Eaters. They would find out eventually that the Bridger siblings had survived and would definitely be out to kill them. They would naturally assume that friends of Fawn and Caleb Bridger had taken the kids in as a favor to them. So now Ezra and Sabine were stuck in the orphanage building with headmistress Miss Atema. Miss Atema was a strict, mean, and abusive person. She saw Ezra and Sabine as not children, but her servants. And the two Bridger siblings couldn't do a thing about it. From dusk to dawn, they cleaned up around the orphanage for her. They weren't even allowed outside for 2 minutes. The only time they was either to throw out scraps or to put rubbish in the bins. Miss Atema didn't even let them go to school. The two kids had taught themselves to read, write, and do the best math they could with the books lying around. The only thing they hated most was when Miss Atema forced them to cook. Sure, they could do it, but they normally didn't want to. Half the time in the kitchen, they got burnt or cut by either the cutlery or the stove. Miss Atema never tended to their injuries, always told them to get over it and move on. The Bridger siblings hated the woman with all their hearts, and they couldn't even write to Lupin or anyone for help because Miss Atema had banned it. They had tried once, and their whip marks lasted for a month. They learned that day not to underestimate the headmistress or do the things she told them not to. The only time they had to themselves was at night. Then they acted like normal 7-year-olds would. Talked, joked, and laughed like there was nothing wrong with the world. Miss Atema was very well aware of the Bridger siblings' magic blood, and, being a squib, she wanted the magic to be destroyed. That's exactly why she put them to work all the time, to try and squash it out of them. And so far, she was failing very badly. The only item the Bridger siblings were able to save from the burning house was the firebolt that saved their lives. Miss Atema was going to burn it, but changed her mind when Sabine and Ezra promised they would do anything she asked if she didn't. So it was locked in a cupboard with 6 pick-proof padlocks to stop them from getting it back. Ezra looked at the wooden floorboards, lost in thought. Neither of the siblings spoke for a long time. "Do you think we'll ever be adopted?" Sabine asked softly. "I hope so. Another month living with the old bat will drive me insane," Ezra replied. Suddenly the door banged open. Sabine and Ezra jumped in surprise. Miss Atema stood there, glaring sternly at the Bridgers. Bertha Atema was a 40-year-old woman with jet black hair, sharp, cold eyes, unusually long fingernails, and tight lips. One look at her, and anyone would assume she was a ghastly, horrid witch. She always smelled heavily of sickening perfume. "Miss Atema," Sabine greeted, standing. "Is there something you need us to do?" The woman looked at the two children with disgust. "You tell me. I told you, Sabine, to toss out the scraps 3 hours ago, and you still haven't done it. And you, Ezra, I changed my mind. You can start cleaning the attic now." "But, Miss," Ezra began. "No excuses and no whining. You're both 7 years old. Stop acting like you own the place." Then she spun on her heels and strutted out the door. Sabine and Ezra stared at her. "Will our misery ever end?" Ezra growled at Sabine. "I'll see you at dinner," Sabine sighed, going out of the room. Ezra followed, feeling like a lost boy in an unforgiving world.